September of 1993, I was on a glorious 8-day rafting trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Now, as you might expect when you're on a river trip, you spend most of your time on the river. Thank you. I knew there'd be somebody out there to help me. But there was this one day on land, this one amazing day of adventure and adrenaline. There were 15 of us on the raft, and on that day, they gave us all a choice. They said we could follow one of the guides up into the Grand Canyon, across a plateau, and down the other side to meet the raft. Or we could stay with the other guide on the raft and just take a gentle float down the river to the rendezvous point. Now, you've already figured out which choice I made, right? Because this would be a really short, really boring story if all I did was tell you about floating down the river. So 12 of us started up that trail. And the aforementioned adrenaline kicked in for the first time when we were really high up in the canyon and the trail narrowed to 12 inches. Now, I know there's a bunch of you out there thinking, big deal. I could walk a trail that's 12 inches wide. But how comfortable would you be if on your left was a solid rock wall and on your right was a sheer drop? I mean, do I look just 12 inches wide to you? So if my shoulder was right up against that rock, more than half my body would be hanging over that precipice. So there was only one really good choice. That was you hug the wall and you sidle along that ledge. A ledge, by the way, that was composed of loose dirt, rocks, and loose pebbles. Just think of a scene from an Indiana Jones movie, and I think you get the picture. Now, measure it sometime. That's about 12 inches. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say maybe that's why they called it a foot. Okay. So that meant when my toes were up against the rock wall, my heels were at or over the edge of that ledge. And with every step that I sidled, I could hear dirt and rocks and pebbles go over the edge. Now, I could hear them go over the edge, but I never heard any hit anything. Now, I can't tell you how far that drop was. I was too terrified to turn around to look. You know, geologists will tell you that it is physically impossible for human fingers to penetrate solid rock. My friends, I'm here to tell you I proved them wrong that day. I made like Wolverine. I made like Wolverine. I dug my fingers into that rock, and then I would drag my body along it. And I did that until finally, blessedly, we got to the plateau. And I could step onto solid ground and breathe a sigh of relief. And then it started to rain. Really hard. And then I heard this sound, this sound like thunder, but it wasn't exactly thunder. I was trying to figure out what that was. So I turned around to look just in time to see the top of a cliff explode off. And I actually witnessed the birth of a waterfall. It's the most magnificent thing I've ever seen. And at that time, it was a relief from the tension, which unfortunately didn't last long, because then they explained to us that we needed to cross a dry riverbed 7 times to get to our final destination. Dry riverbed. Remember the rain? Yeah, it was dry the first time we crossed it. The second time it was ankle deep. The third time it was at our shins and rising fast. The fourth time it was above the knee and you could feel the pressure of the water. The fifth time it was mid-thigh and we strained to get across it. We got to the 6th crossing. It was waist deep, and I mean it was moving fast. So Devin, our very young guide, who we now found out had never been on this trip before in his life, told us that we were going to stay right where we were on high ground. It was too dangerous to cross that river. We were staying right here, even if it means we're sleeping on the ground. Enter the U.S. Marines. Well, more specifically, Mike Harrison, Lieutenant Colonel, USMC. Now, I had sat next to Mike on the raft, a little bit on our way down. I got to know him a little bit, not much. The one thing I did get to know about Mike is you just felt safe with him. There was something about him that made you feel confident, made you feel safe. I had no idea he was freaking Captain America, right? He came over and took charge. And he said, no, we're not staying on this high ground because this is going to be underwater in 3 hours. And we can cross that river safely if we do it right now. And we'll do it by forming a human bridge, and I'll show you how. And with that, he turned and walked back to the river. Now, our young friend Devin was not all that comfortable with this sudden turn of events. But it was pretty clear to all of us who the person with real leadership quality was here. So we all turned and we followed Mike. Anybody here ever formed a human bridge across a river? Yeah, okay. So you know, but they don't know. So I'm going to tell you how to do this. We got down to the edge of the river and Mike explained to us this. He said the first person's going to go in fairly shallow. The second person will go behind them and then you're going to link elbows. And then the third person goes behind them and so forth till we got a chain all the way across the river. Now it's real important that you get the right people in the right place. The river's deepest in the middle. That's where the current is strongest. You need the people with the strongest legs there because what you do is you dig your heels into the riverbed. You push your back against the water and it's your legs that take the pressure of the water. So he very carefully told us who was going to go where. Well, about the time he explained this to us, oh yeah, by the way, once you got the chain, then the first person goes behind the chain, they lean on everybody's back, and they get across. And then the second and third. About the time he finished explaining this to us, as you might imagine, that adrenaline was running again. But it turned out just fine. We did exactly what he said. It worked exactly like he said it was going to work. And then we were celebrating, we did it, we got here. And then it occurred to us, wait a minute, now we're on the wrong side of the river. Right? Because they said there were 7 river crossings. So we got to get across one more time. Well, before we even got to that, we had one more challenging experience to go through. Mike had the lead. He came back to us at one time and he said, okay, folks, here's what's going on. The trail up ahead narrows to about 3-4 feet. Perpendicular to it, there's this log. On that log, there's a Grand Canyon pink rattlesnake with the business end aimed at the trail. Now, if you know anything about rattlesnakes, you know they can launch themselves up to 5 feet to strike. You now know you're going to be 3.5 feet away. Adrenaline started pumping again, okay? Now, fortunately, this is where I came into the picture. I had been in Arizona over 20 years at the time. I knew something about Grand Canyon pink rattlesnakes. They're not aggressive, and they cannot strike stretched out. They have to, like all rattlesnakes, they have to be coiled in order to strike. So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. First person is going to go as far to the left as they can, slowly but steadily, just keep moving past that snake. And when they get on the other side, the next person goes and so forth and so on. Unless that snake coils, in which case the next person stops, slowly backs up, and then we just wait for that snake to uncoil. Well, fortunately for us, he was perfectly happy sunning himself on that log and never did coil, just watched us go on by. And then we got to the 7th crossing. By now, it was literally a raging river. And for the second time, I heard what sounded kind of like thunder, but not exactly like thunder. And then we all got it. It was the sound of huge boulders being pushed along the river bottom by the river. Boulders that would crush us into dust if we fell into that river. And we all knew right away, there's no way we're going across this river. Well, I mean, all of us except for Captain America. He was already scouting us out, figuring out how we were going to do this. So he started out by calling for Pablo. Now, Pablo was the guide who had stayed on the raft. And he knew that Pablo would be looking for us because this was close to the rendezvous point. Sure enough, Pablo came up. Mike said, Pablo, go back to the raft. I saw there was a coil of clothesline on the back of that raft. Bring it up here. And then he turned around and he went, you, and you. Come with me. And we all went, and he found this log, this big tree that had fallen, not the one with the snake, different one. And he said, okay, guys, pick that up, and we're going to carry it over to the riverside. So we pick up this tree, and we carry it over to the riverside. And then he says, okay, stand it up. So somehow we managed to stand this thing up, and then he said, okay, let it go. And we pushed it over, and it fell across the river, hit on the other side of the bank. And he said, now we got a log bridge. But now Pablo had come back up, and he said, Pablo, tie that rope off about 8 or 9 feet high on that tree and throw me the rope. Make sure that's tight. Then he threw him the rope, and Mike got up, and he tied our side 8 or 9 feet up on a tree, and he said, now we got a handhold. So he said, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk across this log, holding on to that rope. Now, don't worry about your feet. They're going to slip and slide on that log. The next words he said are burned into my brain. He said, do not let go of the rope. If you do, you will fall into the tempest below, probably never to be seen again. Well, whatever adrenaline was left in our bodies rose to the occasion. And we got on that log one at a time. And I got to tell you, when you're walking across a log and you look down and you see a raging river underneath you, a torrent going by at high speed and rising, and you hear the boulders crunching against each other, I got on that log and I started to cross, and I'll tell you, my feet slipped this way and that way, and at one time they both went off the log. But I never let go of that rope. None of us did. We all got over and safely back on that raft. And then I figured out the only reason I did all of that was to be here tonight to tell you the story. So I hope you enjoyed it. And yes, it's all true. You know, I'm looking around here and I can tell how many of you are checking out the hat. Right? Yeah? I mean, it's a great hat. I love this hat. It's part of my identity. I love this hat. And now that you've heard the story about Arizona, you know I spent a lot of time in Arizona, and you're thinking, makes perfect sense. He's from Arizona. Of course he'd have a cowboy hat. Well, I did spend 30 years in Arizona. But the hat doesn't really tell the story of where you might say I'm from. It's the shirt that tells the tale. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. And no, I'm not taking anything else off. That's as far as it goes. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. In fact, my entire extended family lived in Brooklyn, New York from the late 1880s, when all 4 of my grandparents came from Russia, through Ellis Island, and settled there, until 1949, when I was 2 years old, and my father betrayed the Klan and moved us to Hillside, New Jersey, so he could be close to the manufacturing plant he had in Newark. Now, my Uncle Tony never could understand that. He'd always say, I don't understand why Jack was my father, why Jack had to move his family west. West. Now, when I got old enough that I thought it was okay for me to talk mano y mano to my uncle, you know, like when I was 12, I'd say to him, Tony, Have you ever even looked at a map of the United States? It's New Jersey, Tony. It's one of the original 13 colonies. When people in Jersey say, I'm going down the shore, they're talking about the Atlantic Ocean, Tony. You can't go further east in the United States than the Atlantic Ocean. To which he would always reply, hey, you just went across the Hudson, you just went west. Now, what's really ironic about that is that it was Tony himself that actually went west. See, Tony was a stage actor. Well, like most stage actors trying to make it in the Big Apple, he was struggling. Broadway, that was Tony's dream. Off Broadway. That was Tony's reality. So finally, he came to his agent, a guy named Eddie DeBenedetti, who everybody just called Eddie Spaghetti, and he said, Eddie, I got to make a living. I got to feed my family. He says, I'm going to pack up. I'm moving to Hollywood. I'm going to do commercials. I'm going to do TV. I'm going to do B movies. I'll do whatever it takes to make a living. But Eddie, you just know that my heart is on Broadway. So you just keep your eyes open for me. And with that, my Uncle Tony packed up his family, and they moved to Hollywood. Now, I'm looking around here, and I can tell that most of you, I mean, I'm not pointing anybody out, but most of you are old enough that you've actually seen my Uncle Tony. You may not be aware of that. But if you watched TV in the late 60s, early 70s, and you saw commercials for Gillette, for Chrysler, for Schaefer Beer, for Burger King, you saw my Uncle Tony. Now, if you're the kind of person that every time a commercial comes on, you flip channels or you go get a sandwich or you head for the bathroom, you've still seen Tony, because Tony was in all kinds of TV shows. Now, wait a minute, I just lied to you. That's not true. Tony was not in all kinds of TV shows. Tony was in one kind of TV show. He was in cop shows. But if you remember the early 70s, if you saw Beretta, Kojak, Magnum PI, Hawaii Five-0, I mean, everything on TV was cop shows. And Tony was always the same part, didn't have the same name all the time. He was the good-looking Italian with the slick back hair, remember him? Who was a hitman for the mafia usually. So, yeah, you saw my Uncle Tony. And if you're sitting there thinking, I never watched those shows, you still saw my Uncle Tony. Because in 1974, red letter year for our family, Tony got a part, very small part, but a speaking part, in Godfather Part 2. So you see, you've seen my Uncle Tony. The best day of his life, though, was April 6, 1976. 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. Tony has never heard Eddie Spaghetti this excited in his life. Tony, I did it, man. I did it. I got you a part in a Broadway show. Lyceum Theater, Tony. Opening night, all the critics are going to be there. Mayor Beam has front row center for opening night. Some guy, he got appendicitis. Hey, bad break for him. Good break for us. I called in a couple favors. I got you the part. Now, it's just a walk-on, Tony. It's just a walk-on, but it's Broadway. And you've got a line. Tony says, great, what's the line? He says, get a pencil. He says, yeah, I got it. Give me the line. He says, here's your line. Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Have you got the line, Tony? Yeah, I got it. Hark, is that a cannon I hear? I got the line. He says, okay, here's the thing, Tony. The show opens tonight. 8 o'clock, the curtain goes up. I didn't tell him you was in L.A. Now, my reputation's on the line here, Tony. You got to get back here. Can you do that? Yeah, I'll get back there. Don't worry about it. I'm there. Hangs up the phone. He throws a toothbrush and some underwear in a bag. He runs downstairs. He calls a cab, gets in the cab. He says, get me to LAX and get me there in a hurry. And the guy's driving him. Now, what do you suppose all the way from Hollywood to LAX Tony is saying in the back seat of that cab? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? No, that's too dramatic. Hark, is that a cannon I hear? That's not dramatic enough. Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Too slow. Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Too fast. All the way to LAX. By the time they get to LAX, this cab driver just wants Tony out of his cab. Tony gets out of the cab, pays the guy, runs into the airport, pays top dollar to get the first flight available to New York. Turns out it's American Airlines, flight 116, goes into LaGuardia. Tony gets on the plane. For those who have flown cross country, it's 6 hours. 6-hour flight. What is Tony saying for 6 hours? Is that a cannon? Exactly. He's sitting there, hark, is that a cannon I hear? 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 It took 11 minutes for the woman sitting next to Tony to get up and go back and get in line for the bathroom. Now, there was nobody in the bathroom, and she didn't have to go to the bathroom. But that was the furthest place on the plane from Tony. Tony's still at it. Is that a cannon? Oh, I forgot the hark. Hark, is that, no, I got to do it right. Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Okay, in 23 minutes, there were 14 people in that line, and none of them had to go to the bathroom. Plane lands, Tony, get it right, will you folks? Tony runs out of the plane, he jumps into a taxi, he says, there's $20 extra in it for you if you get me to the Lyceum Theater by 7:15. How many people in here have ever been to New York? Whoa, tons. What are you doing here? Okay, how many of you have ever been in a New York taxi? Okay, so you all know, if you promise a New York taxi driver more money to get you someplace fast, then suddenly speed limits become speed suggestions. And one-way streets become my-way streets. And so sure enough, he gets Tony there by 7:15. Now, of course, what is Tony saying the whole way from LaGuardia Airport to Broadway? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? Hark, is that a cannon I hear? The guy is going nuts by the time he gets him there. It's one of the reasons he got him there so fast. Tony jumps out of the cab, pays the guy, runs in. The first person he sees is a panicked Eddie Spaghetti. Geez, Tony, you're cutting this close. Come on. They run him to the dressing room. They get him in his costume. They put on his makeup. He runs out on the stage, and he hears, boom! And he goes, what the hell was that? And with that, my Uncle Tony went west again with probably the shortest Broadway career in history. Thank you.